Well, one bold woman endeavored to fulfill her dream, but the path she undertook was way more challenging than even she expected. Well, the new book, Feral, is out now, and we have the opportunity to speak with author Emily Pennington. Take a look. Emily, it's such a pleasure to get to chat with you today. I'm already intrigued by this book. It's called Feral. It's your book. What an interesting story. Let's first talk about this quest you were on. You wanted to hike in all 62 of America's national parks in 1 year. Where did that idea come from?
Feral is a book not only about exploring our country's vast wildernesses that we all know are very magnificent, but also about exploring some of the less trammeled wildernesses internally. And so when I started wanting to plan this big adventure to visit all the national parks, it was because of this really difficult year that I had in 2016 when I was burned out from work. I went through a grueling job search, and I also went through a really difficult breakup. And it was traversing these trails and backpacking and hiking in the national parks that helped build me up into a stronger, more resilient version of myself. And so I figured when I started planning a bigger adventure that was a year-long trip, that I might as well travel to all of the national parks, because if I learned that much and gleaned that much from just these little wilderness adventures on the weekends, I was wondering what the national parks had to teach me if I actually devoted myself to them for a full year.
How neat. See, you already had a calling. Well, yes, you went through some difficult situations, but then a lot of other things happened during your quest, including the pandemic. Tell me about that and what else happened along that journey.
Yes. Well, I think like so many of us, I had a very difficult year in 2020, pandemic notwithstanding. But, I had various illnesses that had nothing to do with COVID. I caught scarlet fever in the remote Arctic Circle in Alaska and had to be flown out by bush plane. I had a very funny encounter in which a very serene picnic dinner at sunset with my girlfriend Eva had this massive black bear walk straight up to our picnic table, totally unfazed by us, yelling and waving our hands. And then at the very last minute, he just casually turned and walked away towards a different part of the forest. So we were grateful for that.
Yes.
And then also, it was a weird weather year. 2020, I think it's sometimes easy to forget, but it was, I think, the worst wildfire season in Pacific Northwest history. I got stuck in a motel in Tacoma, waiting out those horrible orange skies. And Florida also, when I was in southern Florida going to the Everglades and Biscayne and Dry Tortugas National Parks, there was a late season hurricane that also forced me to kind of board up indoors and just patiently twiddle my thumbs until it was safe to go out again.
So yes, definitely encountered all kinds of situations, and oh my goodness, how scary with the black bear. Okay, was it your goal to write a book from the very beginning? Is this something you said, I want to do that at the end, or was it the experiences throughout that year that shaped you to want to write about it?
I actually did have a kernel of an idea in my mind from the very beginning that I wanted to write a book, and I also had the title Feral as like the little seed of an idea. So I did journal every single day of my adventure, whether I was tired from the night before, whether I had a headache, or whether I had scarlet fever in Alaska. I really wanted to make sure that at the very least I gave myself the gift of chronicling this massive adventure and seeing what I learned from it.
Was there ever a time where you just felt like packing it all up and just going home and changing what you were doing in that moment and said, forget about this?
I do go through a breakup about halfway through the book. And it was, unfortunately, it was with someone that I lived with that I thought I would marry. And the breakup happened in the middle of the wilderness in Alaska. And knowing that I would have to go home and pack up my things and never call my home again, it was a really startling emotional experience. And I just knew that I had come too far. By this point, it was early September. I had come too far on my journey to turn back. So I just very kind of sadly and calmly tried to pull up my strength and continue on the national parks trip and save that nesting part of the breakup until December, when I was able to get my own space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so many national parks. Which one would you say was the most difficult to hike?
You know, it's so funny because I think the national park that was the most difficult to hike in was also the one that I frequently will say is my favorite. And that is actually Gates of the Arctic, which, like I said, is way up above the Arctic Circle in Alaska. It's, you know, I think we get a little spoiled down here in the lower 48 because there
Yeah.
are these beautiful roads to different viewpoints and trails and these man-made accoutrements that make it a little easier to visit a national park. But when you're up in Alaska, so many of the parks require you to charter a bush plane, land on a gravel riverbank, and then from there don this huge 50-pound backpack, you know, with your friends and your guide if you hired one. And then you watch this tiny plane take off, and you're just kind of out in the wilderness with your gear for several days. And so not only is there the mental component of that making it challenging to hike, but there are these things called tussocks. I don't know if anyone watching has ever hiked through tussocks, but they are very hellish on your ankles. They're these clumps of dirt and grass. They're these weird columns, and they form when the tundra kind of freezes and thaws each season. And whether you hike on top of them or hike between them, it feels like you're going to snap an ankle at any moment. And so that was very anxiety inducing.
Yikes. Well, you got through that and so many other adventures as you went through your quest. I commend you. Congrats for making it through. And it sounds like you learned so much out of it. And look, you've got yourself a book out of that as well. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you so much. I was stoked to be here, and it was such a pleasure.
It truly was. And Feral, Loving My Mind and Finding Myself in America's National Parks by Emily Pennington is available right now wherever books are sold. We'll be right back.